Hi guys. Well, today we're going to talk to Roger, and we're going to get into some interesting conversations on a legal area. And by the way, something just happened today. We'll talk a little bit about it with that too. We'll see what Roger says with that. But we're going to ask a whole bunch of different questions in there. We'll see where we go and let the Lord kind of lead us. So, how you doing, Roger?
I'm doing great, Scott. How you doing?
All right.
Good.
Just paying a whole bunch of bills and dealing with stuff, you know.
End of the month, first of the month is always the same.
Yeah. People always kind of say, have no idea. Like the third week of the month, you're thinking about what you got to pay next week. And the first day of the month, you're like, okay, I got several little bills got to go out the door. So,
Yes.
yeah. So how it is with that stuff too. Okay. So let's jump into it. Kind of help everyone out with that too. So there was a conviction, several little convictions, the Jack Smith, the I'm blanking out, Fani Willis, and the other woman too,
Letitia James.
Yeah, Letitia, right. And so I don't remember which one was dropped. Was it? No, Letitia's was dropped. Is that correct? Or
Well, okay. So actually, we have. Okay, and I'm going to categorize them by title. Okay, so we have
please.
the classified documents case, which was Jack Smith.
Jack, right.
And we had the election interference, which was the J6 case, which the Supreme Court kind of took care of, but then that was Jack
Right.
Smith also. And then we had the hush money scheme, which is what they call it, which was the Alvin Bragg case. And then we had the elections case in Georgia over the phone
Fani,
call,
right.
which is Fani. And then we had civil case, which was the Letitia James case, and she referred to that as duping banks, where they took care of
Carroll woman, right?
Yeah, and then the E.G. Carroll woman and those types of things. So
Right.
we basically have the civil cases that are still underway, and then the hush money scheme, whatever they decide to do with that. But there's interesting things in both of those that I think people are sort of missing, but we can get to those when you want to. So
Sure. So which one do you want to hit first?
why don't we take a look at the hush money one, because there was a request to dismiss that case today, and the documents were submitted to the court last week. And what's interesting in it is the president has a strong case to have it dismissed because it's going to interfere with his ability to take office and conduct the affairs of the country as president.
Right.
And he's got a legitimate basis for arguing that. Bragg is suggesting that no, we can postpone this until 2029 and pick it up then. And justice delayed is justice denied. So that kind of doesn't work either. But what's interesting is that you have several issues navigating through the background, which I have not heard anyone talk about. One of them goes back to the J6 case, where it was talking about your official duties in office. And what's interesting, if you take a look at the hush money case, that particular case, you have a situation where the daughter, Lauren Merchant, of the judge, was receiving campaign contributions from Kamala Harris.
Which should he should say that and say, like, I have to recuse myself,
Yes.
right?
Going back to 2020, which was before this case was brought. And you also had a situation where Alvin Bragg was getting campaign money from Soros before the case was brought. So based on the Supreme Court ruling in the J6 case, they said unofficial documents, they said official conduct is you have immunity for, unofficial conduct you don't. Now, if I look at New York, New York says that if you give a cash payment to an elected official before a decision is made, and this covers the country, anywhere around the country, local, state, federal, if you give a contribution or engage in a transaction with a public official, which includes judges, prior to the time a case is brought or prior to a decision is made, it's a bribe. If you give it after the decision has been made, it's a gratuity. So the problem we have is that in this situation, you have the DA who took bribes, you have the judge who took bribes through his daughter, and what's interesting is that a case was just filed in the Southern District of New York today, where they are going after actors, foreign actors from this country who paid bribes to influence election outcomes and corporate decisions in India.
Holy cow.
So if you sit here and begin to piece these things together, the judge is really in what I would refer to as a damnable position, because he loses either way. Because if he dismisses this, then Bragg's going to appeal it. And then eventually Bragg has to realize that they're going to come back and say, no, your actions have to be set aside. If the judge decides to let it go forward, then you're going to have an appeal asking that this decision be set aside. Now, what's interesting is that there have been recent studies over the last 15 years. There's probably more than that, but at least the last 15 years, where they have thousands of judges across the country who have been engaged in shady behavior around the time they were making decisions, whether it be opinions, whether it be jury instructions, whether it be motions, whatever type of practice went on before the court. Several of those have been appealed. Some of them have made it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, wait a minute, when it goes from official to unofficial, the case is dismissed with prejudice. In other words, the case is thrown out. So in this case, what you have is you have a judge who's clearly engaged in behavior that is unofficial, taking bribes before the matter was brought forward. So by rights, this case should be dismissed with prejudice. The judge should do it himself, because otherwise, if he doesn't, then he places himself in a situation where he's committed an ongoing crime. Right. Every aspect of this case, from motion arguments to seating the jury, to jury instructions, to the evidence they permitted, anything else, was done basically because of a bribe. Now, you can argue the fact that his daughter may not have received direct benefit from the income that his daughter got, but the key factor is that it came to his daughter, who lives with him, who talks with him, who has an influence over her father. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is you clearly have a foreign influence influencing the district attorney. Correct. Through campaign contributions. And if you look at George Soros, he has always argued that he wanted to bring down Donald Trump. Sure. Now, what's interesting, another element of this is that if you take a look at our statutes, we have statutes in this country that basically provide protection to people and protect their civil rights. And so if you have individuals who commit a conspiracy to go after somebody to deny them their basic constitutional rights, and there it is again, constitutional rights, you are guilty of violating their civil rights. And therefore, that action in and of itself could be another claim that the president would have against both the judge and the DA. So what I'm hearing is three different points. We got... Well, yes. Let me follow up one more. Oh, sure. Okay. So the civil rights that's violating is that under the Constitution, we have a right to enter into contracts between parties. And the Constitution says that government is prohibited from interfering with those contracts. So that actually becomes a fourth element. Government interfered with contracts. It violated the civil rights of President Trump by bringing the action against him. You have bribery and corruption by the district attorney and bribery and corruption by the judge. All of it negates everything. And Bragg is in a pickle as well, because obviously you should never have been able to bring that forward. Yes. I mean, in most reasonable cases that would have walked forward, everyone would have said, what? Get out, kind of response. Absolutely. Right. I mean, and the judge would have done it, and the judge would have said, oh, I can't talk about this one. We'll send you over to, Judge so-and-so. And then he might have said, wait a second, this is all stupid, kind of stuff. Yes. And I think one of the important elements with this as well is that you have a situation where both of them would face, Bragg would have faced the state bar sanctions and be disbarred. The judge would face judicial tenure actions and be removed from office. Plus, any of a number of different cases the judge decided on and the attorney was involved in would be thrown out. Right. And so if you look at this, it sort of unravels everything. Excuse me for interrupting. Go ahead. No, it can put everything, from his future to his past, in question. Yes.
and the same thing with Bragg as well. And so, and then what happens is, doesn't it then say, if anyone else brings anything, you better be ironclad before you do it, kind of thing?
Well, it sort of says that, or you can have a situation because the person is so corrupt, they cannot engage in their practice as a prosecuting attorney or as a
Right.
judge. They actually have to be removed from the bench or removed from office. And
Okay.
again, so you have a situation where now interestingly enough, the legislature can actually come in and impeach them for their unlawful conduct. And so what that does is that kind of shifts the burden. And so when we talk about things like corruption, it migrates through the entire system. And people might say, well, yeah, but I'm a state legislator and I'm not corrupt. Well, you know what? If you don't remove somebody from office for engaging in corrupt behavior, guess
Part
what?
of your oath. Yeah.
You're violating your oath and you're now corrupt. And so you see how this kind of, it's kind of like a parasite moving through the entire system.
Right.
And eventually it overtakes the system. And that's sort of where we're at with a lot of these cases, because you bring other elements into it, like the news media. And if the news media comes along and reports it and they do their so-called fact checking and they decide to justify the behavior of these others, well, guess what? They've now engaged in harming President Trump's civil rights.
Right. It's what has been claimed by, defendants over and over again. I cannot get a fair trial in XYZ place because
Yes.
everyone believes, that I am guilty in that circumstance, which says now it's got to get out of that venue and go someplace else, right?
Yes, that's correct. And
And
just,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say just a couple of other elements on that. A lot of people don't think about this, but in states where judges run for election, they have to file campaign finance reports before the election and after. And so you can identify who is making contributions to these folks.
Right.
And so if you see that they receive big contributions from people, and then you follow it through and find out how they decide on cases, it gives you a pretty good idea that the fix might be in.
Right. So let's jump over to our Jack Smith case, where he through the FBI, goes into Mar-a-Lago, turns over documents. They're shown on a ledge here, and they picture all of this stuff, and people were looking at it going, wait a second, you moved things around. On top of, goes into Barron's room and goes into Melania's room, and which has nothing to do with the case, especially when Clinton and everyone else, including, the interesting part is, Biden as a VP had those same same boxes of stuff in his Corvette, even shows that Corvette before the election. And he cannot have those kinds of things as a VP, where the other ones can have them as a president, those documents.
Well, and an interesting point that people forget, why can't you find anything about Barack Obama? Because he took all of his presidential documents and put them under seal. So nobody can get anything related to Barack Obama. So why is he different than President Trump? And the interesting thing is, which kind of ties into the whole pardoning thing, Democrats have rules for themselves and they have rules for everybody else. And their rules let them get off with doing whatever they feel like doing without consequence, and everybody else has to pay. Right. And everybody else, if there's not a crime there, kind of like Kash Patel had identified, if there's not a crime there, the FBI will create one. They will find something to identify that someone has engaged in some type of criminal behavior, even though they may not have, and their lives will be destroyed. And so that's kind of what happened with President Trump. But see, I also think there was something else that they were looking for there. There were documents that the FBI wanted to get their hands on because they knew that he had access to the documents showing their complicity in the Russia issue, and dealing with the Clinton issue, and going back with all the corruption in the past. And they wanted them because they wanted to be able to either destroy them or make certain no one else had access to them. So that's what they were looking for. And they could have easily, and again, not knowing what was in the file boxes that were there, what they appeared to have done was stage the pictures.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and again, having worked for having worked with law enforcement years ago in criminal investigation with regard to forensic issues, you stage a lot of photographs, but there's certain things that you don't do. You don't move the evidence to take your pictures. When you stage the photograph, what you do is you will put a evidence identification card there, and you might move it around and try and turn on the light to get a better picture. That's the total extent of staging the scene, because you're trying to get the best picture, the best evidence in case it has to go to court.
Well, that's the funniest thing, that even the common observer like me, you move the person from this repose to that repose, whatever, and you say, wait a second, he didn't shoot in that angle, he didn't do this, wasn't there, all those different issues. That's why, when they go into a scene, they're even, they map out where the body is, they take pictures right there, even as bad as that circumstance is. And then they're allowed to, once all the evidence is collected around, then you're allowed to move the body at that, at the person's behest. I mean, the investigator's behest. But but that you can't like set them in little perfect rows that weren't there in the first place, and then put it out there in a prejudice to prejudice people against him.
That's correct.
Right.
So, so I look at these different types of things, and again, it's one of those things where if you tamper with evidence and you try and manipulate the story that's going to show a certain activity or pattern happened, the evidence is no good. It's tainted.
Right.
It still can't be included. And
plus SCOTUS blew him up, I mean, cut him off the knees with many of his statements.
Yes.
And he had to knock down some of the, the possible charges that are out there before even going to court, which made it, kind of a little wet duckling kind of thing.
Yes. And see, I think one of the other things that's important with these cases is when you take a look at it, there are so many points of error that can take place in a court case. And so I will preface this by saying that I have heard people say that they believe that some of these folks like E. Jean Carroll are white hats, or Stormy Daniels is a white hat. Okay, so I don't want to talk about that, but what I want to talk about is the fact that when people come forward with a court case and they are alleging that certain types of things happen, to be able to establish an alleged crime like assault, you need to have some contemporaneous evidence that it took place.
Right.
Whether it's a rape kit, if that took place, whether it's stained clothing, some kind of pictures, some kind of an eyewitness,
video,
or some kind of
something.
So something there that proves this. You can't come in and make a statement that an assault occurred, and I think it was this year or that year. It may have been at this or that location. It might have involved this person. I mean, to me, any kind of court that would look at that, any kind of investigator that would look at it would say, well, why don't you go home and get your story straight?
Correct.
And bring evidence showing that what your story is about has actually happened. Right. Because most people are not going to rely on it. Even the basic investigative techniques that police officers get, or folks in college get in a criminal justice course, they know that. And so if you look at some of the fundamentals that took place in those cases, there's a big problem there. And then as you go forward with these, and you look at the jury instructions, the judge said that you didn't have to be unanimous in how you felt about this, but you needed to have a unanimous verdict. And so one of the things,
totally crazy how that set up.
It was. And they went back, and these so-called fact checkers said, well, no, that's not actually what happened. Actually, if you read the jury instructions, it's actually what happened, because in the jury instructions, the judge says you do not have to reach unanimity on all the elements that are there, just the crimes that were committed. But in most cases, you have to reach unanimity in the elements of that as well. You can't have, say, 4 people say yes and 8 say no, and then come back with a 12-0 verdict. That doesn't happen. And so you've got those elements there. You have a lot of the motion arguments that took place in the courtroom, where they denied Trump's attorneys the opportunity to rebut or to bring on opposing witnesses. Right. And so if you look at all these different elements, it's something that does not survive an appeal, regardless of which case it was, whether it was the so-called hush money or the duping investors. And even with duping investors, if you go back and take a look at it, if there is a standard practice that's employed and it's accepted by federal authorities, which it has been, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
Now, the one element I will add, if you take a look at Michael Cohen and the billing he was doing, now attorneys are under legal obligations when they put their bills together to identify the elements of their bills. So if anything, he would have been guilty of having committed a crime. But you can't impute that crime to the president because the president did not control the billing process. And even if the president did sign a payment voucher based upon the bill, you cannot you cannot impute to the president that he knowingly or set up a scheme to make this happen.
Well,
And so
that would
a
be
lot of these things overreached in what they tried to do.
Well, that would be like, I go and buy, I go and buy things at Walmart, right? And if I have a final bill of $76.84, is it possible for me to, first off, no IRS agent in the history of the world will ever go through every single little line item of every single tiny bill and go, well, that was, that doesn't look like it's office expenses and kind of thing like that. But yet, in essence, in this circumstance, we could have looked at a whole bunch of different things with Cohen and said, wait a second, he hates Trump's guts. We have no, I mean, how would Trump know everything that was done within that case within the billing point, which would have said, that just throws the whole thing in question.
Yes.
Right.
And so, if you look at some of those elements there's a lot of different things that would be, that I would consider would be ripe for appeal based on the judge's decision. If you were to find a court that said, well, we can't assume that the daughter talked to her dad every night, even though she was getting paid to do so. And again, some judges would probably do that because they know that if they go the wrong way, someone's going to come back at them. And the problem is, if you look at our system of justice in this country, and I'm talking about the courts and the people that get appointed, the people that run for office, the undue influence that's there, or the influence, if you will, of money,
Sure,
causes a lot of decisions to be made one way or the other. And it places the people who do not have money at a disadvantage from getting either a fair trial or having their case properly heard, or even being able to afford some kind of representation when they go forward to court. And the problem is that they're always the losers in this, and nobody ever cuts them a break. But on the other hand, for the people that do go forward, if the attorney has a relationship with the judge, they're going to get a more favorable outcome. And that favorable outcome can be as subtle as what kind of evidence gets introduced, what kind of jury instructions are put forward, what type of motions are heard, what type of decisions are made on the motions. There's a lot of subtleties in there that people just don't pay attention to because they don't know about them.
Well, and that happens all the time. But what I see as we we're going to wrap this part up here, because in a bow here. But when I look at it from the outside, we can cut off a whole bunch of different things. So this thing should never have gone forward, should never have gone through conviction. None of these cases have enough merit to make it past even first base, in essence. And yet they did. And yet what it feels like, I mean, when you look from the judge to the lawyers who, Letitia, I don't even know how to go with that one, on top of Merchant, I think it is. Is that
yes, Merchant.
And, both of them have, some naked pictures over all over the place. There's just so many things that are just kangaroo level in here, fifth grader level, that if even a fifth grader would say, this doesn't feel right. And what it feels like to me is like, look, this is part of the movies so that you realize how stupid it really is, that this is the part that needs to get fixed.
Yes, and I would agree with that, and I would take that one step further, that if I look at these cases are perfect for a boomerang effect.
Right.
But where the boomerang impact comes in is that rather than going after people with all the theatrics that are involved, you're identifying people who are part of a corrupt system.
Right.
And who need to be removed. And then it's going to be up to them to identify whether or not their behavior was corrupt or not.
Right.
And I think part of this is all part of the larger exposure, because if the public's not aware of it, the public will only pay attention to it when there's sensationalism there or when it's covered by the media.
Right.
And if I look at the media and the degree to which they're covering these things, they're into it like everybody else.
Right.
So I think in that regard, that's sort of how I look at this, because in most cases, you would never see this. If you're looking at getting at the corruption that exists in the judiciary, and considering the fact that there's thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of judges over the years that have been less than honorable in some of the decisions they made. I mean, the same thing is true with attorneys. Not every attorney is an honest person. And so you will sit here, and I'm not trying to besmirch either one of those two types of professions, but my point is that sometimes influence can happen with the smallest thing.
Right.
It can be buying someone a drink and having a conversation. It can be offering someone a campaign contribution. And, I mean, I've given to judges who are running for office too, but I knew I would never have a case before them, and they were friends. Right. And so, but it was a small amount. But by the same token, I know of others who gave large sums of money with an expectation that if they went before that judge, there was going to be a favorable decision.
Right.
And so I look at those, and yes, there is a lot of corruption that's there. There's a lot of things that need to be rooted out. And again, I'm going to stretch across the aisle here. And if I go to Nacera and we look at ruling out, tearing out all this corruption and corrupt activities, and try to get back to a constitutional-based system, all these things have to go.
Right.
And the way that you get rid of them is you show the public how corrupt they've become.
Right.
In order to rip them out of the system.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of like, I guess what we've been living with is, I remember a college apartment that I moved into, and it was trash, and there were holes in the wall. There was all kinds of other things, and we used to put posters over those holes, right? And it wasn't lit up very well, so you couldn't really see all the dirty and all the other things that were wrong with that place. But when you turn on the lights and you pull off the posters, you go, wow, this place is trash.
Yes.
Kind of thing. And I think that's where we are, is we're ripping the posters off. We're turning on the lights, and you're seeing the system has been just going to pot for a very, very long time frame.
Yes, it has. I would agree with that. I look over the length of time I've been involved in doing the work that I do, and it just, every time I turn around, I'm seeing more and more things that are so dramatically different than what they were decades ago.
Right.
And even as recent as 10 or 15 years ago, I mean, it's just unreal how bad things have become. And people I thought were honest turned out to be dishonest. People
Right.
I thought were good, honorable people turned out to be less than honorable. They either took bribes or they agreed to do this, that, or the other. People that I was in meetings with at one point in time turned out later to be arrested because of something they did. And I look back and I go, yeah, well, you offered me that opportunity. And I said, no. I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we've all been there in some situation where we knew we shouldn't step over that line. And when you do it, you feel it. I mean, you normally feel that kind of thing. But what Trump is doing, and obviously he's not upset about this, because he wouldn't be dancing on the stage every time he turned around, even during these cases with that stuff too, is he really wasn't worried about it, because he's trying to show you how sick, lots of portions of these federal cases specifically are right now.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to, now, we'll deal with this kind of quickly here, but do you think these are the last things that are going to come up about with him, or do you think that there could be more, or they just all get destroyed pretty quickly?
Well, I think one of the things that's out there, I mean, I think the two cases with in New York, the civil case and the criminal case, are going to be disposed of pretty quickly.
Right.
In large part because they will fall apart. They don't have enough basis on which to stand.
Right.
I think on the other ones, though, there's the election cases in the states, and I believe some of these folks in the states, until they're taken away, either by arrest or by loss of office, they will try and go back after the president and say, well, he was the one that inspired, the electors, as I refer to, the fake electors, or he was the one that that inspired the challenging of the election until all that information comes out. Once that comes out, then yes, I think all these are going to be gone.
Well, I mean, let's just use I mean, I'll just use this example and we'll move on here with this point. But, you put the Fani Willis case with the electors and you put it in Georgia, and she's sleeping with a guy that is involved with the case, which kind of puts her into question, on top of, it's in Georgia, which was a hotly contested race. Now, if this was done in Oklahoma or it was done in Tennessee, it might have been a different conversation. I think that's another conversation of another mode of, this was a movie trying to tell you how sick some of these places have been.
Yes, that I would agree with. And I think that, again, as part of the movie, there's these other, what I want to refer to them as, it's like secondary storylines that are being woven through this. And if you look at it, this is a fabric that's telling us that what we have grown to over the last 200 years plus has become such a corrupt organization that the way we fix it is we have to root out all the evil and all the places that they are, and we have to take a look at righting our ship of state. And we have to do it in a certain way that it's going to benefit goodness and it's going to drive out evil.
Right.
And that's probably the simplest way to put it. And in that process, there will be people that will have to stand up and probably defend their good honor and their good name by what they've done. But if they've done good, they'll be fine.
Listen, I mean, if you're trying to stand up and say the things that you've done, and someone wants to listen, I'm not trying to besmirch all attorneys. That is why I have Roger on here. And I'm not trying to besmirch all judges. That's not the point. It's the point is the stuff that's behind the curtains, in essence. And that's what Roger's kind of going off with that too. So
yes, and I would just say also that I'm not speaking ill against all judges and attorneys.
No.
I'm just identifying the fact that if you look at a lot of the information that has been printed in the public, that has been research that's been done by a variety of different organizations, cases that have moved through the courts, you will see that there are many of these situations where cases have been set aside. And so when I look at that, that tells me that there's a factual based consideration that the courts are looking at, and they're making the decision. And the decisions to set these cases aside and provide a defendant a freedom from the charges against them and penalize the prosecution, those have been upheld by Democrats and Republicans alike, because no one likes miscarriage of justice. And that's essentially what you have with a lot of these. And they want to hold the people responsible for that accountable.
Right. Okay, so let's move over here, into the Hunter Biden pardon. So basically, I think it was today, if I said that right, today, that Joe Biden goes back 11 years to 2014 and says, or 2013, somewhere or other, that time frame, and says, Hunter is pardoned from all of those things, even though we know for a fact he's a coke dealer. I mean, he's been on coke. We know that he's been involved with Ukrainian companies, on and on and on. And the Hunter Biden laptop that the FBI would not admit was true, would shove it to the side. And we were told that we were lying when we would bring it up in 2020. Now it's fully true, which shows us way more ugliness than we ever imagined. And then he has said over and over again that he would never pardon Hunter, including the press secretary said the same thing. And yet he did it today in an odd sense with it too. So what's your initial kind of reaction to that?
Well, my initial reaction is that in order to issue a pardon under the Constitution, you have to be a duly elected president of the United States. A non-president cannot issue a pardon. And so I don't believe the pardon actually was made, because Joe Biden is not the real Joe Biden.
Right.
Okay. And again, I would just clarify that. I've met Joe Biden before, and I know who he is. And I've been in a couple of different situations many, many years ago. And I can look at the guy playing Joe Biden and know that's not Joe Biden. Just like I have a lot of other people that I see that claim to be somebody that they're not. So
Right.
from
Right.
at the very beginning, I will start off by saying you can't issue a pardon if you're not a president or a
Like
governor.
it's me walking into a sheriff's office and deciding I'm going to be the Tulsa County sheriff, and like everything that I do, no matter how many people I fake out, everything I do for those months or years that I'm in is irrelevant, and it's actually prosecutable against me with that case
Yes.
sort of circumstance with that.
See, and I'll actually go further by saying if I take a look at the executive orders, many of those executive orders over the last number of years have been signed by the president. If you do the research, and I'm talking about President Trump,
Yep.
if you take a look at the fact that a national emergency was declared in March of 2020, I mean, there are so many elements of proof there that you can rely on over and above the fact that the person you're looking at is not the real Joe Biden. So if
Right.
you look at all these different things, I mean, really from my perspective, the only thing the pardon does, and the only thing the follow-up conversations that says there's going to be hundreds or thousands more that receive pardons, is that the Democrats are engaged in this part of the storyline, which is going to make them hated by the public,
Right.
unable to walk down the streets, no political party affiliation because people will want nothing to do with them. So again, this is part of that script that's playing out. Again, you can't pardon somebody and claim you're a president when in fact you're not.
Right.
And so that's issue number one. Issue number two, if you look at all the various crimes that were done, all those crimes are more than just tax crimes, setting up, fake LLCs, doing drugs, whatever else he was involved in. Those are a lot of crimes that can be prosecutable by, say, military tribunal.
Sure.
They can be prosecutable by the International Court of Criminal Justice. And because they're crimes against humanity, you can't forgive those people's behavior for what they've done because there's another higher level of judicial evaluation, if you will, that's going to look at those people. So you can set aside the pardon as theatrics.
Well, and you just kind of jumped it, so that's great. You mentioned three different areas. You mentioned crimes against humanity. You mentioned also international court issues, and then the level of those, but kind of intimating even as potential as treason.
Yes.
So when we set those things up, a president can't pardon a guy that has an international warrant against him anyway. Correct or incorrect?
That's correct. I mean, they can try. Bill Clinton tried to do that a couple of times, and it didn't work. Other people that have been elected president have tried to do these pardons, but the reality is that when you take a look at the crimes you've done against humanity, whether they are based upon the vaccines that were given, or going in and bombing countries or overthrowing governments, I mean, there's so many different issues out there. Even something as simple as defacing a foreign flag,
right,
can bring you charges between the International Court of Criminal Justice. So you have to sit here and look at all the different elements that people have been involved in. And I understand people are getting worked up about this. The Democrats are going absolutely mad over it because they're thinking you're going to destroy our party. You're going to destroy us. But that's the whole purpose of it. Because again, I believe we would not be seeing this if this were not part of a movie, if this were not a scripted story within that movie that's showing how bad the other side is.
right.
And when I say the other side, I should say how bad the Democrat side is, because they have ruined this country. I mean, even to look at someone like Eric Holder, who comes out and says he saw nothing wrong with it, but he says they got to do something about Kash Patel because he has no experience to run the FBI. That sounds to me like someone is really afraid of what's going to happen to them.
Right.
And so they're trying to justify one bad behavior, hoping that they get pardoned as well. But like I said, Biden can pardon the world if he wants to. He's not president.
Right. I mean,
So-
and that's the funny part. And I've been hearing over and over again, people going, well, that really makes me upset because then, Hunter gets away with everything. No, he doesn't get away with everything. Stop. And even if Joe was the president, if that really was the president, no matter, how you feel about that, you still can't do. You're talking about international crime that you're dealing with Hunter with Ukraine, which ropes in the guy who pardoned him, in essence.
Yes.
Which ropes in the dad. So how does that get away?
Well, and see, the other part of that too is if we take a look at this, if the whole purpose of this scripted storyline is to expose the bad actors and their bad behavior, there's going to be a lot of these types of things that take place and get rolled out for the public to see. And it's almost like watching a football game. You got to be careful not to react to every play, because eventually, the plays are going to work out, hopefully to a touchdown or to something better than what you're seeing. So you have to be careful not to get too into it and too reactive to it. But in this particular situation, if we watch the things that are being exposed, we are seeing a lot of information coming out that the public had no idea existed. And the media is doing their typical drumbeat to put it out there and trying to come up with justification that is different than what they said 6 months ago about whether certain behaviors and acts should be taking place. And again, all this is doing is exposing them because, again, I believe based on how deep everybody has been into the deep state, into the administrative state, and the activities they've been involved in doing over time, for whatever benefit they were getting out of it, you have to show the public everything that takes place.
Right.
And there's so much out there, we can't see it over a 3-day or a 10-day period. We have to watch it as it goes forward. And so living through this, I believe, helps people understand, hopefully it will help them understand what's real and what's not.
Well, and Roger, you just said it beautifully with that too. I've said over and over again, which I know have heard, but is that no matter how many days you put it out there, I mean, you can't do it. You can't do it an EBS and reveal of everything and do it for week upon week upon week, where you basically depress everyone so badly they're wanting to hang themselves in the backyard. But so no matter what you do, you cannot just have that full on thing. So even after you do 3 or 4 days or whatever the exact circumstance is, you got to move on. But it's going to take years of unraveling and explaining, even after you've already worked to fix that stuff. Explain why we're having to fix it.
Yes, it will. And again, I think one of the things one of the reasons why the alternative media is so important, and I'm going to try and be careful how I cast this net. If you listen to alternative media and what people are saying, you have to migrate to the places where people can give you good, reliable information, verifiable information. Sometimes people, whether it's an alternative media or mainstream, they will just say things to hear themselves talk.
Sure.
So a good thing to do is to take notes, to listen, to research, to try and build your own level of knowledge, because that helps you explain to people around you what's really taking place. And if you look at the different actors and the things they're doing, I mean, I will give you an example. Several of the people I work with are involved in working with people in the U.S. Senate and the Congress. And I hear oftentimes from them saying, well, they're going to head over to so-and-so's office. And I said, so when you go? And they said, well, we're leaving right now. And then they'll call me a half hour later. And I said, so how'd the meeting go? It went great. Well, they didn't go to the office. They made a phone call. Nobody has been visiting offices because no one's there. And the same thing happens with some of the different agencies. And again, if you look at some of the most recent information that's come out with talk about the DOGE department, you talk about the fact that a lot of office buildings are empty. People are working remotely. They're not around. So again, all those different things prove the fact that certain other activities are taking place in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And even if you look at state governments, they have the same type of thing going on. So what people need to do is they need to be a little more attentive. It's important to use your senses, your God-given senses. You listen, you see, you evaluate, and you try and remember or at least make notes about the things you come across. And more of these will fall into place for people. And I think that really helps them get a little more sense of calmness. Because if they're going back and forth and all this different activities going on, it starts to play games with you. And you get to the point of where you can get some level of comfort so that you can at least rest and, understand what's taking place.
Well, I think that's a beautiful statement. I'm going to use an example. I mean, I don't care about the newer ones, but I'm a big Star Trek fan. And when you get it, when you're watching a Star Trek episode, you feel like you're there, right? You're the navigator, whatever that position is, the engineer. You're doing the job. You're feeling some of that stuff happen, and yet when you pull back and you look at the scene, you go, well, that's just a set. It's got some pretty lights in there and they're moving around the camera in essence. So like what really is it? And I think what Roger's trying to tell you guys is pull back just a hair. If you just step back just a little bit and realize with your senses, there really hasn't been enough people around the Capitol, including what is out front of the White House on the right-hand side of, I think it's on Pennsylvania Avenue, and there's this huge structure that's going up that is definitely not anything to do with an inauguration kind of thing.
Actually, they put one of those up in 2020.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting because if you look at it, the first thing I thought of, well, it sort of reminds me a little bit of the gallows.
Sure does.
From the Civil War era, when they hung the people that were accused of assassinating Lincoln.
Sure.
But it also can look probably a little bit like spectator stands, but I've never seen spectator stands built like that because they're more vertical than horizontal.
Right.
So, you kind of go back to the gallows part, and then if you sit and look closely at it, there's some kind of activity going there, whether it doesn't look like a media platform, with cameras and so, so there's something going on there that really causes people to wonder. And again, if you look at all the videos that have taken place around the White House, there's been a lot of construction going on. There's been a variety of different things. And that's one of those things where it keeps you guessing.
Yeah.
And unless you're on the ground and can see it,
even if you're on the ground and think you're seeing it, you can't get that close.
No, you can't.
How do you know what that sucker is off at 300 yards? I mean, it'd be hard to tell.
It would be hard to tell. I mean, it's again, there's some things that you just kind of see and figure they're there, and I'll hopefully at some point figure out what it is. There's other things that you can dive into and understand why they are the way they are.
Right.
That's one of them you can't. It's going back to 2020 when I started watching some of the different issues that were coming out. I'm very familiar about the Capitol. I've worked around there before, and I was amazed at the number of motor coaches that were coming in and people that were getting on the motor coaches, the staff that was coming out of the Capitol. They were all carrying backpacks. And it was one of those things where if you watch the videos, it's like everybody who worked there came out of all the offices, and they still kept coming. So they had to come from someplace else. So the question becomes, what does that do to your senses about what's taking place? Well, you can identify some alternative thoughts, if you will, that maybe there was activity in the area below those. I've been in some of the tunnels in DC, and I know they connect. I know for a fact that there are tunnels that go from the Capitol to the White House. I've been in a couple of them. And when I first experienced it, I thought it was kind of weird. But
the movie Dave tells you it. I mean, there's a movie Dave,
yes.
I think it's 1992, and they are underneath the tunnel. I mean, guys, if you haven't seen the movie Dave, it's Sigourney Weaver, and I'm blanking out his name, but anyway, the point is that, the fake president guy, he wants to get out, and he goes underneath in the tunnels, and he intimates that it's during Lincoln's time frame that these tunnels were underneath the White House.
Well, and actually, if you look at the way Washington is set up, okay, so you have all the federal buildings, okay, every federal building is connected to the other one by a tunnel system.
Sure.
And so you go, there's underground parking there, so you go through the tunnels and connect with that maze of things. But what's interesting is at certain points along the way, there are stairwells that go further down.
Right.
That have like emergency locks on them and so forth. So there are people that can go further down within those systems that are actually below 2 or 3 levels below the the subterranean parking decks that are there. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of movement 24 hours a day back and forth in those tunnels that people are totally unaware of because it's so busy above. And then you've got the metro system there that runs in between some of those tunnels. And so you've got a lot of activity going on underneath the ground in DC.
Right.
And so when I was watching those buses and picking up folks, it was like, okay, where are all these people coming from? Because I was counting the number of buses and the number of people I know that work in some of the offices, and there was a lot more people getting in those buses than that worked on Capitol Hill.
Right.
And so those things cause you to think, but again, that's an example of where you use your senses. You see, you hear, you think about what's going on, and you get a kind of sense of what may be taking place. And then again, you compare that with what you see outside your home and your community, where you live. And so you know that there are certain things that are taking place in other parts of the country that are completely different than what's going on in your world.
Right.
And then you watch the airplanes and the helicopters and everything else above. And again, that gives you a different perspective to experience. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that as part of a movie that's been scripted, there's all these different things that are going on, some of which we know, many of which we don't. But as long as our life doesn't get disrupted, we shouldn't be worrying about it because, again, if you believe that things are going to move forward in a positive way, they can't get much worse than what they are.
Sure.
There's at least hope for people to take a look at that and hopefully realize that, we will be in a better place at some point. Hopefully soon.
I think where a lot of people are sitting right now is they're sitting and feeling like, and I hear this all the time, well, it's just been forever. I don't know if I believe anything. I don't know if it's really going to happen. And I go, hold on. Do you see all the nutty things that are going on around you? Corruption, when you see it, that, viscerally, listen, the normal response to corruption and bad things is a revulsion. That is just a normal response to that. And when the public sees it, they'll push back on the small amount of people that are really supposedly in charge. And so that's what's happening. That's what I mean. The reality is most dictatorships and communist countries know that if 5% of their people come against them, there's no way they stay in power.
Right. They're done. Yes, I agree with that. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And that's why I think that if we look overall at everything we have, we're still able to obtain most of the things that we as Americans are comfortable having and obtaining. This type of year, people still have stores to go to. They can still buy, they're not living under martial law. They still have the wherewithal to get out and about and do things. Prices are higher. But then you have people who are saying inflation's not bad, and they're lying to you because you can experience. So you're finding out where the people who are telling the truth and being honest with you about what's going on versus the people that have been dishonest with you. And so it helps you understand all the different things that come into play. And so then people start talking about the vax, or they see someone wearing a mask at a store, and that goes into that conversation and say, well, wait a minute, I know so-and-so who got the vax. A lot of people have died. And so they start doing research into what the impact of that was and the long-term impact of some of these things. And so we're in a very troubled time right now, but it's important for people to try and investigate things enough to the point of where they can get some sense of calmness. Right. And realize that as we go forward, you will see improvements, but time is an individual thing. Some of us have been so used to watching things that we go, well, okay, we'll mark time by 24 hours in a day. The time we're awake, the time we're asleep. Others are saying the clock ticks so slowly, a minute seems like an hour.
Right.
And so
we've all felt that before.
We've all felt that way.
Right. But I think what Roger's kind of giving you the viewpoint, and I've been trying to say this to you as well. This is why I love Roger with this, is that, guys realize the time is actually is running out for them. They know they're freaking out. We've thought that they were freaking out in the past. They were, because there was more things happening than you didn't realize. Now that you're seeing it, now that you know that, many things are on the table, of the 25th Amendment to, Trump coming back early, to any number of things that could happen. This thing is setting up to be over soon enough.
Yes, I agree with that. And I could just mention a couple of things here. If you take a look at the corporate response to the DEI argument, companies are rushing feverishly to fix their settings. Universities are too, because they realize that they're going to be in trouble. The money's not going to be there to do what they want to do. And the problem is the people who believe in those things are trying to push back, but they don't have enough support to do it, because everybody's saying, if we want to survive, we have to do this. The second thing is if you look at, again, this whole concept of cutting the size of government. I mean, I have read and heard comments from Vivek that says that, his inbox is like Niagara Falls. He is getting so many good suggestions. Joni Ernst said the same thing. So you sit here and look at where these things are going, and people truly are stepping up to be involved. And that's the beauty of this, because we've never had the opportunity to really do that before, unless you had access to somebody who could do it, or you paid somebody, you had the wealth to pay somebody. Now, everyday Americans are getting involved in doing this. And that's one of the beautiful things that are happening now, because people are getting a voice that they never had before.
Right.
And I think that's why it's important to seize the time and do these things.
And that's what you guys need to do. So Roger's kind of laid it on your doorstep. What can you do? There are tons of things that you can do. There are tons of ways you can do that. If we're not in that position to do it, it's not time to walk forward. I mean, it's like the woman who's getting prepared, to walk down the aisle, but the music hasn't started. Okay. She knows that it's her cue to start down the aisle when the music goes. We're not there yet. Okay. So do the stuff you need to get ready before you start walking down the aisle, in essence, with that too.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, guys. Well, we just hope you have some good comments, at least some great comments. We're happy to answer them. Roger will come back with more answers in there too. And there's just a lot of stuff. Sometimes he's bringing up more questions than the answers, and that's a good thing.
Well, and anytime you can offer questions that you would like addressed, we'll take a look at them. And if it's a good thing to follow forward on, we'll do that.
We'll do it. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much.
All right.